The truth, what's the truth on raw about different things and different temperatures? You know, from my perspective, if you have, say, sprouts that you've grown in a greenhouse, you take those sprouts, as soon as you cut them, you have to put them in the refrigerator. They're only really at their peak right when you cut them, but they'll keep another 2 or 3 days. If you leave those sprouts after they're cut on the counter, they're going to wilt. You know, I think that the 118 degrees that people use as raw came from the honey manufacturing industry, because it's well known in bees, in raw honey, that at 118 the enzymes do definitely start to break down and that honey can become toxic. I think that's where a lot of this got started, with the raw temperature perspective. So now, for instance, if you've ever had a bunch of lemons or limes or oranges stuffed in your refrigerator, they'll go moldy quicker in there than if you take them and leave them out in the sun. They like to be in the direct sun, and they won't ever go moldy or bad. The guy who produces our mesquite beans, you know, the desert floor temperatures typically reach 120 plus, 130, 140 degrees. And the beans need that to produce their flavor for a really sweet mesquite bean. So what really is raw and what does it matter? I think what matters is as low as processed as possible, that all nuts and seeds and beans are sprouted before consumption. There are even some, if you go check on some of James Sheridan's research, there are some beans that need to be sprouted and washed and then cooked. I don't think that's the case with cacao. I think cacao does get damaged when it's cooked and it does become a toxic substance. So we definitely use, everything that we use comes from all unroasted. That's kind of the determination that I think is important. We're using unroasted beans and we're using a germination process. Whereas typically all cacao is roasted, and it's typically roasted. It got to be known in the industry that it was roasted because it created flavor. It was originally roasted, in my opinion, to get rid of funk and bacteria and microbes, and then people were like, wow, what a great flavor this is. So now that we've come into the, whatever, you know, this 20th century, 21st century, we have a lot cleaner production methods, and people are aware of pathogens and microbes and things that can cause other, you know, human beings to get sick. And we can handle all that through, instead of just cooking it all out of there, we can handle it through clean processes and clean practices. It starts with the farmers keeping it really clean during the harvest period time. It's very important when the pods are taken off the trees that they don't actually nick or cut the tree or the pod in the wrong way, and have a clean knife when they're doing it so it doesn't infect the pod itself. Then those pods go to a storage area, and they're peeled and they're put into a fermentation chamber. 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and even in some remote places today where they're not aware of it, they were letting chickens and dogs and everything walk through their fermentation areas. It was literally just banana leaves laying on the ground with cacao beans and some banana leaves on top of that. But now everything is in clean rooms and screened in a sterile process where there's not potential for dogs and chickens and things to be walking around in there. And after the beans go in the fermentation chambers, you know, that's always cleaned beforehand with a safe organic cleaner, whatever's certified organic. Is typically we use an iodine, and then I come back with a hydrogen peroxide to get rid of the iodine flavor, because it's known in the food industry that iodine is the safest one that's recognized as a cleaner, and it also leaves a residue flavor, so then it's all cleaned off with hydrogen peroxide. We do all that in our own shop here where we manufacture the chocolate. So then the beans are taken from there when they reach the germination stage that we want before the peak temperatures are reached of fermentation to kill the germ. They're taken out of that and they're brought into washers and literally just flooded with thousands and thousands of gallons of water, just clean well water, clean pure well water to wash the pulp off, and then into a drying chamber where the temperatures are monitored closely. With all the processes we're using, it's labor intensive because there has to be somebody watching it all the time and every step of the way. Whereas in a mass manufactured process, they can basically turn loose, you know, literally freight train cars full of cacao can just be running through the different pieces of equipment with hardly anybody watching them. Everything we do has to be watched at all times and checked. For instance, say on the fermentation, it may take 12 hours, it may take 36 hours, and it takes somebody there to check that. During the washing process, it may take 1 day, it may take a half a day. You just have to watch it because each crop and each harvest is unique, so it's always watched the whole time. Otherwise, you know, we wouldn't get those pretty nice washed beans. We'd have something that was soggy, or the skins were missing, or whatever. You know, it'd go wrong. The line we're shooting for, because it's what seems to be recognized in the industry as raw, is 120. And that's the line we're shooting for. And it literally just takes someone there. It takes a smaller piece of machinery. It takes more time to press it. It's just time and temperature. That's all it is. And a longer period of time and a lower temperature. And someone to monitor it while the process is happening. Whereas these, for instance, the machine we have can do a few hundred kilos an hour. In the mass manufactured machines, they're doing 1,500 to 2,000 kilos an hour. And the difference in that is that they're using higher heat. With heat, liquid becomes more fluid. More fluidity means it moves faster. It's really simple. So one thing I think is really important for people that we're going to see in the raw food world is people are going to start looking at temperatures differently. What needs to be done at what temperature, instead of just this one blanket temperature of 120 and it's raw. You know, maybe one day there will be a way to prove that some certain sort of enzymatic activity is better at certain temperatures than others. You know, I do basically, as a basic rule, keeping things down under 120 degrees is a great idea.